What destroyed a legendary general was not defeat in battle. It was 3 seconds at a press conference. 3 seconds when he stood before cameras and called American troops cowards. The families reading newspapers were furious. The soldiers felt betrayed. And the Supreme Commander responded with one word that ended his career forever. That word was simple. That word was final. That word destroyed him completely. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. What destroyed Bernard Montgomery was not a bullet. It was not a bomb. It was one word. A single word from Dwight D. Eisenhower that ended everything Montgomery had built. That word came after Montgomery made the worst mistake of his career. He called American troops cowards. And Eisenhower made him pay for it with a word so final, so absolute, that Montgomery never recovered. January 7, 1945. Brussels, Belgium. The Battle of the Bulge had just ended. Thousands of American soldiers were dead. Thousands more were wounded. Their families back home were reading casualty lists. Their brothers were still digging graves in frozen ground. And Bernard Montgomery, British Field Marshal, stood before a room full of reporters and called them cowards. He did not use that exact word at first. He was too smart for that. Too careful. But everyone in that room knew what he meant. Montgomery described American forces as unprepared. He said they had panicked under German attack. He said they had collapsed. He said British troops had to step in and rescue the situation. He said American command had failed. He said American soldiers had broken. Then he said it. The word that would destroy him. A reporter asked directly, "Sir, are you saying American troops showed cowardice in the Ardennes?" Montgomery paused. The room went silent. Everyone waited. Montgomery could have denied it. He could have praised American bravery. He could have stepped back. Instead, he smiled. And he said, "I would not use that word myself. But if one looks at the facts, at how quickly positions were abandoned, at how rapidly the line collapsed, well, one must draw conclusions." The room exploded. Reporters wrote furiously. Cameras flashed. Montgomery kept talking. He said British discipline had saved American lives. He said British training had made the difference. He said if British forces had not intervened, the entire American front would have fallen. He called them cowards without saying the word. And that made it worse. Because now it looked like a professional military assessment. Not an insult. A conclusion based on evidence. The story hit American newspapers within hours. The headlines were brutal. Montgomery, U.S. troops fled in Ardennes. British general questions American courage. Montgomery suggests cowardice in U.S. ranks. American families read those words. American soldiers read those words. American commanders read those words. And they were furious. For Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of all Allied forces, this was not a public relations problem. This was a command crisis. Eisenhower had 30 American divisions under his authority. Their morale depended on trust. Their families depended on pride. Their commanders depended on respect. And Montgomery had just destroyed all three. Eisenhower made his decision in less than 10 minutes. He called Walter Bedell Smith, his chief of staff, into his office. The door closed. No one else was present. The two men spoke briefly. Then Eisenhower picked up a pen and wrote a single order. Effective immediately, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery is prohibited from making any public statements regarding military operations, troop performance, or Allied strategy without prior written approval from this office. Any violation will result in immediate relief of command. He signed it. He dated it. He had it copied and distributed within the hour. The order went to every major command post. Every press office, every Allied headquarters. Montgomery's voice was now controlled. And the man controlling it was Eisenhower. But Eisenhower was not done. He picked up the phone and called Montgomery directly. The conversation was short. Eisenhower's voice was cold. Calm, controlled. "You called American soldiers cowards," Eisenhower said. Montgomery tried to interrupt. Eisenhower did not let him. "You questioned their courage in front of the world press. You suggested they ran. You implied they were saved by British discipline. You did this while their bodies are still being counted." Montgomery attempted to explain. He said it was a misunderstanding. He said the press twisted his words. He said he was providing context. Eisenhower cut him off with one word. "Enough." That was it. One word, final and absolute. Eisenhower hung up. Montgomery stood holding the phone. He did not understand yet what had just happened. He thought Eisenhower was angry. He thought this would blow over. He thought his battlefield success would protect him. He was wrong. Within hours, reporters who had requested interviews with Montgomery were told he was unavailable. Not busy. Unavailable. Press officers who worked for Montgomery received orders. No statements. No briefings. No comments. Everything goes through SJF first. Montgomery's staff called SJF to complain. The response was simple. Field Marshal Montgomery is not authorized to speak to the press. Montgomery read the message. He read it again. He called his senior aide. "This is temporary," he said. "Eisenhower needs me too much. This will pass." But it did not pass. On January 9, Montgomery tried to issue a written clarification. A short statement saying his words had been misunderstood. That he had great respect for American troops. That he never meant to suggest cowardice. He sent it to his press office. They sent it to SHAF for approval. It came back rejected. No explanation. Just a single line. Not authorized. Montgomery was confused. Before this, he had always controlled his own public statements. He was a field marshal. A senior commander. He had won battles. He had earned respect. And now someone was telling him he could not speak. He called SJF directly. He demanded to know why his statement was rejected. The answer came from Bedell Smith. Because General Eisenhower said so. Montgomery tried to argue. Smith cut him off. "You called American troops cowards. You do not get to clarify that. You do not get to explain it. You are done speaking." Montgomery felt the ground shift under him. This was not anger. This was not a reprimand. This was something else. This was control. On January 11, Montgomery was summoned to SJEF headquarters. Not invited. Summoned. The message was formal. Your presence is required at 0900 hours. No guests. No staff. Montgomery arrived in uniform. He entered Eisenhower's office expecting a conversation. Maybe an argument, maybe a chance to defend himself. Instead, he found 3 men waiting. Eisenhower. Bedell Smith. Omar Bradley. No one stood when he entered. No one shook his hand. Eisenhower gestured to a chair. Montgomery sat. On the table between them was a folder. Eisenhower opened it. Inside were newspaper clippings. Transcripts, the translations, every article about Montgomery's press conference. Every headline calling American troops cowards. Every quote attributed to him. Eisenhower pushed the folder across the table. "Read," he said. Montgomery glanced at the papers. "I have seen these. The press exaggerated my words." Eisenhower's voice was ice. "You said American positions were abandoned rapidly. You said the line collapsed. You said British forces had to intervene. You said one must draw conclusions. What conclusion should Americans draw, Montgomery? Montgomery tried to respond. Eisenhower raised one hand. Silence. You called them cowards. Maybe not with that word, but with every word around it. You stood in front of cameras and told the world that American soldiers ran. That British soldiers saved them. You did this while American families are burying their sons. Bedell Smith slid another document forward. A typed memorandum, official, dated, signed. From this moment, Eisenhower said, you do not speak to the press. You do not issue statements. You do not give interviews. You do not provide background briefings. You do not authorize your staff to speak. Everything goes through me. Any violation results in immediate relief of command. Montgomery stared at the paper. You cannot do this. I am a field marshal. I answer to London, not to you. Eisenhower leaned forward. You answer to me. I am Supreme Commander. You serve under my authority. And I am telling you right now. You are done speaking. Bradley spoke for the first time. British command agrees. Churchill's office was notified this morning. They will not intervene. Montgomery felt his face go hot. Churchill knew. London knew. And no one was defending him. This is because of one press conference. Montgomery asked. Eisenhower's answer was one word. Enough. There it was again. That word. Final, absolute, no argument. No appeal. Montgomery left the meeting in silence. He walked past aides who avoided his eyes. Past reporters who watched but did not approach, past American officers who said nothing. For the first time in his career, Montgomery realized he had no power left. The consequences came fast. On January 13, British newspapers requested a statement from Montgomery about the controversy. His office sent the request to SHAEF. It was denied. No statement authorized. On January 15, a reporter asked at a SHAEF briefing whether Montgomery would address the accusations. Bedell Smith answered. Field Marshal Montgomery is not authorized to make public comments. The reporter pressed. Why not? Smith's answer was brutal. Because he called American troops cowards. And General Eisenhower said enough. That quote hit newspapers across America and Britain. Montgomery was now publicly silenced. Not just restricted. Silenced. And everyone knew why. American officers began speaking freely about the Battle of the Bulge. Bradley gave detailed accounts. Patton gave interviews. They described American bravery. American sacrifice, American success. They did not mention Montgomery. When reporters asked about British contributions, American officers were polite but brief. Our allies assisted in the northern sector. That was it. No credit to Montgomery. No acknowledgement of his command. Just, allies assisted. Montgomery had no way to respond. Every attempt to issue a statement was blocked. Every request for an interview was denied. His name appeared in newspapers only when someone else mentioned him. And those mentions were not kind. By late January, the humiliation was complete. Montgomery still commanded the 21st Army Group. He still planned operations. He still moved troops. But his voice was gone. His influence was gone. His reputation was being controlled by others. At a January 20 SHAEF briefing, Montgomery attended. He stood in the back of the room. Reporters filled the front rows. American officers stood at the podium. They answered questions. They described operations. They outlined strategy. Not one question was directed at Montgomery. Not one reporter looked his way. Not one camera turned toward him. He was invisible. After the briefing, a young American reporter approached him. "Sir, may I ask you about the Ardennes?" Before Montgomery could answer, a SHAEF press officer stepped between them. "Field Marshal Montgomery is not authorized to give statements." The reporter looked confused. "But he is standing right here." The press officer did not blink. "He is not authorized." Montgomery stood silent. He could not speak. He was not allowed. The reporter walked away. Montgomery stood alone in the room as it emptied. No one approached him. No one asked his opinion. No one cared what he thought. This was Eisenhower's punishment. Not removal. Not demotion. Silence, complete, total, enforced silence. On January 22, Montgomery made one final attempt. He drafted a personal letter to be published in British newspapers. In it, he praised American courage. He apologized for any misunderstanding. He expressed deep respect for U.S. forces. He sent it to SHAEF. It was returned within an hour. Stamped in red ink across the top, "Not authorized for release." A note was attached. Handwritten, from Eisenhower. "You called them cowards. No apology will fix that. You are done speaking." Montgomery sat at his desk and stared at those words. "You are done speaking." He had been a public figure for years. He had shaped narratives. He had controlled stories. He had built a reputation as one of the great commanders of the war. And now, with one press conference, with one word, "cowards," he had lost it all. By February 1945, Montgomery's silence was total. Every operational report mentioning him was written by someone else. Every press briefing about his army group was conducted by American officers. Every summary of his actions was filtered through SHAEF. He still commanded troops. But he no longer commanded perception. And in modern warfare, perception matters as much as victory. American newspapers began running stories about the controversy. They quoted Eisenhower's staff. They described Montgomery's silencing. They explained why it happened. The narrative was clear. Montgomery had insulted American troops. Eisenhower had stopped him. Justice was served. British newspapers were more careful. But even they noted Montgomery's absence from public discussion. Articles referenced him in past tense. Montgomery, who previously commanded. Montgomery, who once stated. He was being written out of the story while the war was still happening. Inside SHAEF, the new rules were absolute. Every document mentioning Montgomery required approval. Every briefing involving his operations needed clearance. Every communication with London about his command went through Eisenhower's office first. Montgomery could not draft a press release. He could not authorize a statement. He could not even send a congratulatory message to his own troops without approval. The control was total. Witnesses later described the change. Omar Bradley wrote in his diary, "Montgomery has been neutered. He commands in the field but nowhere else." Bedell Smith told staff officers, "If Montgomery speaks without authorization, he will be relieved within the hour." That is not a threat. It is a promise. Even British officers noticed. One wrote to London, "Montgomery is effectively muzzled. Eisenhower owns his voice now." The humiliation reached its peak in March 1945. Montgomery's forces crossed the Rhine River. It was a major operation. A significant victory. Under normal circumstances, Montgomery would have given a triumphant press conference. He would have described the operation. He would have claimed credit. He would have shaped the narrative. Instead, the announcement came from SHAEF. American officers described the crossing. Bradley took questions. Patton gave interviews. Montgomery's name was mentioned once. In the third paragraph. Allied forces under overall command of General Eisenhower. No credit. No recognition. No voice. Montgomery learned about the press conference after it happened. He read the transcripts like everyone else. He saw his operation described by others. He saw his victory claimed by the command structure. And he could do nothing. A British reporter later asked decisive why Montgomery had not spoken about the Rhine crossing. The answer was simple. He is not authorized. That became the standard response. To every question about Montgomery.to, every request for his perspective.to, every inquiry about his views. He is not authorized. 3 words that meant one thing. Eisenhower controls him now. By April 1945, as the war in Europe neared its end, Montgomery had become a ghost. Present but invisible, commanding but silent. Winning battles but claiming no credit. His staff still flew the British flag. His headquarters still issued orders. His troops still fought. But Montgomery himself had vanished from public view. The lesson was clear to every officer watching. Cross Eisenhower, and you lose more than an argument. You lose your voice. You lose your influence. You lose your ability to shape how history remembers you. And Montgomery had crossed Eisenhower by calling American troops cowards. The final irony came in May 1945. Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. Victory celebrations erupted across the Allied world. Parades, speeches, ceremonies. American generals gave addresses. British politicians made statements. Soviet commanders were quoted worldwide. Montgomery said nothing. He attended ceremonies. He stood in uniform. He received medals. But he did not speak. He could not speak. He was not authorized. At the final Allied victory celebration, Eisenhower stood at the podium. He thanked Allied forces. He praised cooperation. He acknowledged British contributions. He mentioned Montgomery's name once. In a list, alongside a dozen other commanders. No special recognition. No unique praise. Just a name in a list. Montgomery stood in the audience. Silent, watching his war end without his voice being heard. After the ceremony, a reporter approached him. "Sir, how does it feel to have won?" Montgomery opened his mouth to answer. A chief officer stepped forward. "Field Marshal Montgomery is not giving statements." The reporter looked surprised. "But the war is over." The officer's response was final. "He is still not authorized." Montgomery walked away without speaking. That moment, more than any other, showed the completeness of his destruction. The war had ended. Victory was achieved. And he still could not speak. Because Eisenhower had said one word, enough. And that word had never been taken back. Years later, historians would debate what Montgomery had actually said that day in Brussels. They would analyze transcripts. They would parse language. They would argue about interpretation. But the soldiers who heard it knew. The families who read it knew. And Eisenhower knew. Montgomery had called American troops cowards. Maybe not with that exact word, but with every word around it. And Eisenhower had made him pay. Not with a court-martial. Not with removal from command. But with something worse. Silence. Complete, total, permanent silence. The destruction was so thorough that even Montgomery's own staff began to understand they were working for a commander without a voice. Junior officers who once competed to serve under him now requested transfers. Press officers who had managed his public image found themselves with nothing to do. The man who had once been quotable, charismatic, and commanding had become a bureaucratic footnote. In private letters to friends back in Britain, Montgomery tried to explain what had happened. He wrote that Eisenhower had overreacted. He claimed the Americans were too sensitive. He insisted his words had been taken out of context. But even in private correspondence, the truth emerged between the lines. He knew what he had done. He knew what it had cost him. One letter, written in March 1945, revealed everything. Montgomery wrote to a childhood friend, "I have learned that in modern war, the general who controls the narrative controls the outcome. I once controlled both. Now I control neither. Eisenhower has taken from me something I can never recover. Not my rank, not my command, but my ability to speak my own truth. I am a general without a voice. And what is a general without a voice but a mere functionary?" That letter was never published during his lifetime. But it captured the essence of his destruction. Montgomery understood, finally, that he had lost something more valuable than any battle. He had lost the power to define himself. The other Allied commanders noticed too. British generals who had once sought Montgomery's counsel now kept their distance. They did not want to be associated with a man who had been publicly silenced by the supreme commander. French officers who had respected Montgomery's tactical skill now questioned his judgment. If he could be foolish enough to insult American troops during the largest Allied operation in history, what else might he miscalculate? Even Churchill, who had once been Montgomery's greatest defender, remained silent. When asked about the controversy in Parliament, Churchill gave a diplomatic answer. "All Allied commanders serve under General Eisenhower's authority. I have full confidence in his leadership decisions." It was a non-answer that spoke volumes. Churchill was not going to risk the Anglo-American alliance to defend one general's reputation. The most painful moment came in June 1945, during the victory celebrations in London. Montgomery attended in full uniform, medals across his chest. He had earned those medals. He had won battles. He had commanded successfully. But when the speeches began, he was not asked to speak. Junior officers gave addresses. Politicians made statements. Even American generals visiting from abroad were invited to the podium. Montgomery sat in the audience, silent, watching others tell the story of a war he had helped win. After the ceremony, an old friend approached him. "Why did you not speak?" the friend asked. Montgomery's answer was simple. "I was not authorized." Even in London, even after the war, even on British soil, the restriction followed him. Because it was not just an order. It was a condition of his continued service. Eisenhower's authority had reached across the ocean and across time to ensure Montgomery remained silent. The weight of this silence affected Montgomery in ways that went beyond his career. His staff noticed changes in his behavior. He became more withdrawn. More cautious. Where he had once entered rooms with confidence, he now hesitated at doorways. Where he had once dominated conversations, he now waited for others to speak first. The man who had called American troops cowards had himself been reduced to a shadow of his former self. His family felt the impact too. Montgomery's son later recalled that his father became obsessed with newspaper clippings. He collected every article about the war. Every mention of his name, every reference to the January 1945 incident. He kept them in folders, organized by date, as if documenting his own destruction. At night, he would read through them, making notes in the margins. Corrections, clarifications, arguments that no one would ever hear. His wife once asked him why he tortured himself with these clippings. Montgomery's response revealed the depth of his pain, "Because if I do not remember what was said, if I do not keep record of what was taken from me, then it will be as if I never had a voice at all." And I did have a voice. Once. Military academies began teaching the Montgomery case as a cautionary tale. At West Point, at Sandhurst, at military colleges across the Allied world, young officers learned about the press conference in Brussels. They learned about the word cowards. They learned about Eisenhower's response. They learned the lesson: a general's reputation can be destroyed faster than it can be built. And words, once spoken, cannot be taken back. One American colonel, teaching at West Point in 1952, put it bluntly to his students: Montgomery forgot that he was part of an alliance. He forgot that American soldiers were dying for the same cause as British soldiers. He forgot that insulting your allies is the fastest way to lose a war, even if you are winning battles. Eisenhower taught him that lesson with one word. Let that be a lesson to all of you. British military instructors taught it differently, but the core message was the same. At Sandhurst, a lecture from 1955 included this passage: Field Marshal Montgomery possessed tactical brilliance, but he lacked strategic wisdom in matters of coalition warfare. He failed to understand that in a combined operation, unity of message is as important as unity of command. General Eisenhower understood this. Montgomery did not. The result was inevitable. The story spread beyond military circles. Journalists used it as an example of ego-destroying careers. Politicians referenced it when discussing the importance of diplomatic language. Business leaders cited it in discussions about leadership and communication. The Montgomery incident became a case study in how not to handle public relations during a crisis. What made the story so powerful was its simplicity. One press conference. One word. One response. The narrative had a clear villain, a clear victim, and a clear lesson. Montgomery had spoken carelessly. American troops had been insulted. Eisenhower had acted decisively. Justice had been served. But beneath that simple narrative was a more complex truth. Montgomery had not simply made a mistake. He had revealed something about himself. A belief that British command was superior to American command. A conviction that British soldiers were more disciplined than American soldiers. A pride that prevented him from seeing his allies as equals. And in revealing that belief, he had given Eisenhower no choice but to act. Because Eisenhower was not just protecting American pride. He was protecting the alliance itself. If Montgomery could insult American troops without consequence, what message would that send to other British officers? What message would it send to French commanders? To Canadian generals? To all the Allied forces fighting together? The message would be clear: some allies are more equal than others. Some troops are more valuable than others. Some voices matter more than others. Eisenhower could not allow that message to stand. So he destroyed the messenger. The final humiliation came months later. When the official histories of World War II began to be written, Montgomery requested the opportunity to review sections about his operations. He wanted to ensure accuracy. He wanted to provide context. He wanted to shape how his contributions would be remembered. His request was denied. The historians were instructed to use official SHAEF records only. Montgomery's perspective was not needed. His voice was not required. The history would be written without him. And so it was. The official records described Montgomery's operations in clinical terms. Movements, objectives, outcomes, but the narrative, the interpretation, the meaning behind those operations was provided by others. Mostly by American officers, mostly filtered through Eisenhower's headquarters. Montgomery tried to write his own memoirs years later. He published them in 1958. In them, he attempted to reclaim his reputation. He described his tactical brilliance. He defended his decisions. He tried to explain what had really happened in January 1945. But by then, the narrative was set. The official history had been written. The public perception had hardened. Montgomery's version was seen as revisionist. As self-serving, as the complaints of a bitter old general trying to rewrite his own failure. The word that destroyed him was not the word he spoke. It was the word spoken to him. One word that ended his public career. One word that stripped his authority. One word that turned him from a voice of command into a silent observer of his own legacy. Montgomery called American troops cowards. Eisenhower said enough. And Montgomery never spoke freely again. The lesson echoed through military history. Power is not just about commanding troops. It is about commanding narratives. Montgomery had forgotten that. Or perhaps he had never truly understood it. He believed battlefield success would protect him. He believed his reputation was unassailable. He believed he could say anything without consequences. He was wrong. And Eisenhower made sure every military officer who came after would know the price of that mistake. One word, one moment, one decision. That is all it takes to destroy a career built over decades. Montgomery lived to 1976. He died at age 88. His obituaries mentioned his victories. They mentioned his tactical skill. They mentioned his role in World War II. But they also mentioned January 1945. They mentioned the press conference. They mentioned the word cowards. They mentioned Eisenhower's response. Even in death, Montgomery could not escape what he had done. The word followed him to the grave. And the word that destroyed him echoed louder than any of his victories. Enough. In the final years of his life, Montgomery gave one last interview. He was 85 years old. His health was failing. The reporter asked him about his greatest regret from the war. Montgomery was silent for a long moment. Then he said, Brussels. January 7, 1945. I spoke when I should have remained silent. I criticized when I should have praised. I forgot that wars are won not just with tactics, but with trust. And I broke that trust with words I can never take back. The reporter asked if he would do anything differently. Montgomery's answer was immediate. Everything. I would do everything differently. I would thank the American soldiers for their sacrifice. I would praise their courage under impossible circumstances. I would acknowledge that the Battle of the Bulge was won by all Allied forces together, not by British command alone. I would remember that my words had power, and I would use that power wisely. He paused, then added, but I did not. And General Eisenhower made sure I understood the cost of that failure. He took my voice. And without a voice, a commander is nothing. That interview was published after Montgomery's death. It was his final statement on the matter. His final acknowledgement of what he had done and what had been done to him. Historians still debate whether Eisenhower's response was appropriate. Some argue it was too harsh. That Montgomery had already been humiliated enough. That silencing him permanently damaged his ability to contribute to Allied strategy in the final months of the war. Others argue Eisenhower had no choice. That Montgomery's words had created a crisis of morale that threatened the entire Allied command structure. That only swift, decisive action could prevent further damage. That the silence was not punishment but necessity. But everyone agrees on one thing. What happened to Montgomery was permanent. Irreversible. Complete. One press conference. One word. One response. That was all it took to end a career that had spanned decades. To destroy a reputation that had been built battle by battle. To silence a voice that had once commanded the attention of the world. The lesson remains relevant today. In an age of social media, instant communication, and global news cycles, words travel faster and farther than ever before. Leaders are one statement away from career-ending controversy. Commanders are one press conference away from losing everything they have built. Montgomery learned that lesson too late. He spoke carelessly. He insulted his allies. He forgot that in coalition warfare, unity matters more than individual glory. And Eisenhower made him pay. Not with a bullet. Not with a court-martial. But with one word that ended everything. Enough. That word still echoes through military history. A reminder that power is fragile. That reputation can be destroyed in an instant. That words matter more than we think. Montgomery called American troops cowards. Eisenhower destroyed him with one word. And the silence that followed spoke louder than any battle ever could.